Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Theater. It's the podcast where we take a look at relationships and mental health through the lens of movies, TV, and pop culture. I'm your host, Josh Treese. I've got a master's degree in marriage and family counseling and therapy, and I'm a practicing therapist in Music City, USA. I also love movies. No, I mean really love. I'm on a mission to help people more easily understand mental health and relationships and help break down the stigmas surrounding counseling and therapy. And that's why every week a guest therapist and I talk about a movie and what relationship or mental health issues it highlights. Thanks so much for downloading today's episode. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes, and while you're doing that, help the show out by giving it a 5-star rating and review in the podcast app. Today in the theater, my guest is Karen Moran. Karen is the first licensed alcohol and drug addiction counselor to be on the show, and I was already excited to talk to her just because of that. But then it turned out that she was just the absolute nicest person on the planet and brought so much of her wisdom with her. I walked away feeling encouraged and with a deeper sense of compassion and understanding for those dealing with past traumas. Have you ever thought much about trauma? Saying that we were traumatized by something has become almost commonplace, even if it's nowhere near true. To better understand what trauma is, it's easiest to break it down into its two types. The first is invasive trauma. Invasive trauma is what people typically think of when discussing it. It's when something happens to a person that wasn't supposed to happen. Then there's abandonment trauma. Abandonment trauma is when something doesn't happen to a person that should have happened. And trauma is a personal thing. What can be traumatizing to one person may not be to another. Karen brought with her 2000's The Kid. It's a movie starring Bruce Willis and Spencer Breslin. IMDb says it's about an unhappy and disliked image consultant getting a second shot at life when he is mysteriously confronted by an 8-year-old version of himself. Let's jump right in. Dim the lights, raise the curtain, and start the previews. Welcome to the theater. Karen, welcome. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Being on today. I'm so excited to talk with you. I like to start out every show with just asking my guest, why therapy? Why did you pick to do what you do?
You know, it's such an interesting question, and I get that question a lot, often from clients, you know, or lay people in the street who ask what I do for a living, and I get all kinds of interesting responses about that. And The first answer that comes to mind right away when I hear the question is, I feel like it picked me. And let me elaborate a little bit on what I mean by that. I grew up in a family where the role that I played in that family was that of the helper. I was the mediator. I was the peacemaker, the one who tried to make everything okay and sort of gloss over the rugged parts of family life. And because of the evolution of that survival trait of my own, my friends all came to me with their problems, and that was a role I played everywhere I was planted. And I had some personal things happen that facilitated a bit of an unraveling for me in college. And I began to do my own personal therapy work. And in doing that, I gained a lot of wisdom, had an opportunity to do a lot of healing, and being the recipient and beneficiary of some really helpful, wise, non-judging people. I wanted to be that.
Yeah.
I wanted to channel what was already sort of an instinctive or learned outcome from my own family system into something that, well, was healthier, that required less bleeding out of me things I didn't have. And as a professional, I had an opportunity to learn how to take care of my energy and not give away more than I had. And I learned boundaries, which are very important for all of us. And I started as a professional in 1989. I was 21. And I don't know that I have ever loved anything as much as the work I do, with the exception of motherhood.
Yeah. Which is a different kind of work.
Which is a different kind of work.
Mm-hmm.
But I love being in the presence of courage. I love watching people take risks and begin to see the fruits of that risk, mm-hmm. and watch the lights come on and their own aha moments, because it keeps me connected to my own.
Yeah.
And I relate to the power of that, the power of risk-taking and vulnerability. And I think most of us walk through life trying really hard not to do either of those things, mm-hmm. more than necessary. And what I have found again and again when I open myself up and I allow myself to do the thing I'm scared of, to say the thing I'm afraid to say, I have never been sorry. Mm-hmm. I might be sorry in a moment. It might be that a person I say it to doesn't handle it the way I want, or it might have some immediate sort of sting to it, or, you know, buyer's remorse on my part for putting something out there. But ultimately, it has always facilitated for me more growth and subsequently more peace. Yeah. And so I believe in that. And when I'm sitting with a client, you know, one of the things I do in addition to counseling is I'm a supervisor. I help individuals get licensed for the same license that I have. And one of the things that I say often to my supervisees is, there is no them. There is only us. And those of us that work in this field, we are the wounded healers. We are humans in the journey. And for another person to allow themselves to hold space with us in their vulnerable moments, I can't think of a bigger honor.
I if I'm telling my why therapy story, the very, very, very short condensed version is always, I was given help, mm-hmm. and out of that, I feel a deep desire to give to others.
Exactly.
What I received, and I'll use the word gracefully, just because I can't look back and say like, oh, I deserved, or I had a right, or I was entitled. I look at it as, somebody, which, I was referred to my therapist, but somebody else helped reach down, pull me up, cared for me, and pointed me in the direction of where to go. I have never asked a guest this before, but I wonder if you might speak to it. You mentioned you had some things happen in college, and then you began to go to therapy. Mm-hmm. I wonder, were there any barriers inside of you to seeking that kind of help? Were you just comfortable going to therapy, or was there anything that maybe at the time told you, maybe that's not for me yet?
No, actually, I grew up in a family. My mother was a master's level psychiatric nurse. And so I grew up, she worked in psychiatric facilities and taught nursing, mm-hmm. and my father was a physician. And so my mother was a great influence on me in a lot of ways, as was my dad, but differently so. And there was never any stigma attached to the idea of therapy because she worked in behavioral health. And so I had seen a therapist in high school. I had had some memories of abuse when I was younger and had gone. My mother immediately responded by helping me see a therapist. So when I was 16, I had briefly seen a therapist. Found it helpful just to have a place to talk out loud about something most people don't want to talk about at all. Yeah. And so when I had my come apart in college, I knew that was going to be what I needed to do. Okay. And I actually went to treatment. I went to 28 days of residential treatment. And because my mother worked for a corporation that owned behavioral health companies, I was able to get into treatment pretty easily, and grateful for that connection. And I was scared to go. I'd never been to treatment before, and the idea of spending the night someplace for a month was a little weird. But I knew I couldn't stay at school, and I knew that things had gotten pretty far off base there. So
you were familiar enough with the concept of counseling, therapy, mental health,
absolutely,
through the family and that kind of thing. If there's somebody who's maybe listening, today who maybe has something inside of them that they want to reach out and receive help from a therapist, but maybe they've got some barriers, what's something that you could say to them?
I actually often will have a client in my office who's never been to a therapist before, and what I say to them is, forget what you've seen in the movies. It isn't really like that. And it really is much more like the development of any relationship. It begins at the beginning. When somebody is sitting in front of me for the first time, well, first of all, I believe in being an informed consumer. I believe in interviewing your therapist. And I welcome interviews. I welcome somebody calling me and asking me whatever questions they need to ask to bridge the gap between a phone call and a meeting.
Sure.
And even once we meet, what I say is there's 1,000 things that go into a good fit for a therapist. And it may be my scope of practice, and the realm I work in is different than what somebody needs. It also might be that I remind you too much of your great Aunt Sally who you hated, Yeah. And so I offer a free live consultation after a phone call to make sure that we both agree that I am the best fit. And so I go to great lengths to help a person feel comfortable. And I'm very aware both, and one of my first questions when I'm talking to somebody is, tell me about your experiences with counseling. And if the answer is they have none, or they've had bad experiences, then I am all ears, because I wish to, if nothing else, either create a positive and seamless initial meeting or help them have a corrective experience from whatever.
Yeah, that's even a form of therapy there, because I have had clients who previous experience with counseling has been, I hesitate to use the word traumatic.
But sometimes it is.
But that fits. Yeah. And I think about, a client that I have who his only experience had been with couples therapy before, but for 1 or 2 sessions, because they felt like the counselor was kind of taking the side of one of them and blaming the other, which just felt shaming, and it didn't. So even to invite them to tell that story, it, like you said, a corrective experience, it's a way of processing and dealing with, and it's like therapy before you get to the therapy of why they're in the room.
Correct.
And another way of establishing trust.
Right. And the other thing I would say to the listener who's not had that experience is, people don't hire me to be an expert on them. That there is only one person in the room who is an expert on that person, and that is that person. And what I bring is specialized knowledge and training in the area I work in, and more objectivity about them than they have about themselves. And I honestly think the latter more than the former sometimes, that I just have a perspective that's useful because I'm not so close to the picture, that I have too much skin in the game. And so my job is to be a good student of who's in front of me and listen very carefully and offer the things I bring. And then when I offer it, the person in front of me has a right to do whatever they wish to do with that, including nothing. That there is no agenda in the room beyond their own. And my goal is their goal. And so this isn't a place where there will be any sort of message about what they want being incorrect or wrong. I happen to believe that all human beings have the right to self-determination.
Yeah.
And everybody gets to decide the kind of life they want and what's acceptable and unacceptable. It has nothing to do with what I decide about my life.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I saw a movie a little while ago called Life Animated, which if I ever do an episode, I'm on every episode, so I don't feel the pressure to do that. But if I ever do one, I may pick. It was a documentary about a young man with autism who became verbal through Disney quotes.
Wow.
Extremely powerful. And I have a brother who has autism. So I saw the trailer for the movie and cried seconds into it and bought the movie without seeing it and then cried many times in the movie. But there's a line that was in the trailer and it's in the movie, and it has stuck with me for so long. And I think it is similar to what you just said. Who gets to decide what a meaningful life is?
Correct.
And I think that every person gets to decide that for themselves.
Right.
So what I may find meaning in, my clients may not, my friends may not, my family may not, but that's the beauty of free will. It's the beauty of us all having a life, is that we get to determine that and pursue that.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
My goal is to invite a meaningful experience by the client's definition of meaningful.
Mm-hmm. And the way that we learn that is through the therapeutic relationship
Correct.
that develops.
So I have to be willing to, like I said, be a good student of the person across from me and really see the world through their lens in order to be able to be useful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that in my personal experience, maybe in grad school, I just, you bring in kind of presuppositions into the field, and you think, oh, a therapist looks this way or does that. I had the thing where I thought, I need a high back leather chair. I need a tweed jacket with leather elbows, maybe a pipe. It's Freud.
That's right.
And then, you think, I think that even in thinking about what stereotypes I had of the work, maybe I thought it was a little more, at least initially, lecture-based and a little more like putting a template down upon somebody, which is strange because that wasn't my experience as a client.
Right.
But I think that I thought, having never been a therapist before I became one, that the therapist was, they had every answer. And I thought it was based more on personal experience than it was on education and technique and, a learned skill.
Right.
And so I thought, well, clearly every therapist has to be the smartest person.
Right.
The most lived or wise person, and then they will imprint their experience on me.
Well, I relate to that lens, and I would say that as a young clinician, that scared the crap out of me.
Yes.
I was so afraid because I believed that was my job, was to impart all this wisdom and all these answers. And quite frankly, I'm a human being. I still am waiting for some answers in my own life.
Yes.
And so early on, I think that as younger clinicians, less experienced counselors, we believe a bit about what inexperienced clients believe about us, which is that they're coming to us to be fixed. And what I start with is the question, tell me why you feel broken. Why would anybody need to fix you? Tell me about that, because I operate from a belief that there is no such thing as unusual behavior if you know the backstory.
Everybody makes sense in the context of their own story.
And most of the time we don't know the backstory. Sometimes we don't even know our own backstory. We don't understand why a survival skill exists for us because it doesn't make logical sense, or we've lost the origins of it. And so we don't know, why do I keep doing that? Or why do I keep having these relationships? Or why do I, we ask these questions, and they aren't really questions, they're judgments. And the question underneath the why do I keep doing this and is what's wrong with me? And that's the shame that's at the belly of all of these questions. And so when somebody's sitting across from me, I already know there's shame under there. And that's what we're going to go after is gently and patiently take a look at what's happening that you're doubting yourself, that you're not believing that the way you show up in the world came from someplace really valid. I appreciate that it may not work anymore, but there was a time when it did, and it was born of necessity. And I already believe that even before I know the backstory. I believe that whatever that trait is that may not make any sense at all today came from someplace really valid and important and necessary.
And you're still here.
And you're still here,
Yeah.
so it carried you this far.
So it worked.
Yeah.
You might be in a place where you've done some reflection or evaluation and thought, this doesn't work for me anymore.
Correct.
But you're still here.
Exactly.
And that says something.
Indeed.
Yeah. Well, speaking of saying something, what movie did you bring for us to talk about today?
I brought an oldie but a goodie, Disney's The Kid.
Yeah. It's a movie that I think I mentioned before. I had a friend who has been on the show before. He has talked about this movie forever, but it's one where I had always heard things about and never saw until you decided to pick it and then watched it.
Good.
And for me, it was a similar experience to several other movies that we've had on the show, where for a long time in the movie, I thought, where in the world is this going to go? And in the last maybe 20 minutes, everything gets tied together. And I was like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Tell me what about this movie drew you to it and made you want to pick it.
Well, I first saw it probably when it was a newer release. And, what do I want to say about that? I think about the new language that in the therapy world we're using these days about adverse childhood experiences, right? And recognizing that the root of a lot of painful patterns of behavior stem from unresolved adverse childhood experiences. And what I appreciated about the storyline, am I allowed to do spoilers for your listeners?
100%.
Okay.
I feel like if you're listening to a podcast centered around movies and you're listening to one where the title of the movie's in the episode,
Right.
and especially if the movie came out in, I think, 2001, 2000,
Right.
something like that, 18 years on, the statute of limitations on spoilers, I think, is 2 weeks.
Fair
And
point.
So
Fair
18 years
point.
later, it's fair game.
So what I love about the storyline with Bruce Willis, his character, and his character in several seasons of life, is he begins in the film as this, sort of on the surface, he is the embodiment of the judge. He's built an entire career around judging and being judgmental.
And even like snap judgments,
and
too.
snap judgments.
Yeah.
And he has lived his life that way, and he has built a successful career on judging other people and having them pay him to do it. Mm-hmm. And so talk about the evolution of a survival skill. He really took his own history and turned it into something viable.
Mm-hmm. Image consultant.
Mm-hmm. Which is, he tells the kid in the film is Bruce at 8 years, as he's approaching his 8th birthday. He just shows up and is suddenly in his home and in his life and all over in his untidy ways. And he's a, awkward 8-year-old, as most 8-year-old boys are. And
with a bowl cut.
Which
I had.
And he's just, awkward in all the most delightful ways 8-year-old boys are. And Bruce is absolutely disgusted by him and calls him a loser and belittles him and berates him, tells him he's I can't remember the word he uses now, but calls him chubby and says he needs to go on a diet. He's just brutal with this kid, which is hard to watch in the beginning when you're not really sure what's going on here and who this child is. All you see is Bruce Willis being just absolutely savage with this kid.
And I don't think he's sure who the kid is at the beginning either.
He's not sure either, but you can tell he's unsettled by the presence because he says early on he doesn't have much memory of his childhood, that he'd blocked it out on purpose. And so the fact that this is him as an 8-year-old boy takes him a minute to get used to that, and then he feels crazy. And Lily Tomlin's awesome in this film as the assistant. And
she's awesome in most things.
She is. I just love her. But,
yeah.
So there's actually a line that the kid says when the kid is trying to understand what he at 40 years old, Bruce Willis is approaching his 40th birthday, and the kid's trying to get his head around what it is that he does for a living. And the fact that he's a chickless, dogless 40-year-old and he grows up to be a loser and that no part of his life gets better is sort of where the kid is figuring out, you know, he'd had hopes that by 40 things would look different for him. And so they're both having this mutual loathing of one another. And the kid says, I think I figured out what you do for a living. You help people pretend to be something they're not, so they can lie about who they are, which is exactly what Bruce does. Mm-hmm. And so he's made a career out of helping people do exactly what he does because of his own self-loathing. Mm-hmm. And he has this tick in his eye that he keeps trying to cover up. And so what we find in the journey of this relationship and all the players that are sort of part of that is he gets clarity about the origins of his pain. And when I was on my own journey and when I'm sitting with a client who has a hard time connecting with the word trauma, most people consider trauma to be only those things that we hear about on the news, you know, that violence and certainly those things are traumatic. But there is a lot of trauma. I think most trauma is what might be considered relationship trauma, relational trauma, where there are fractures or absences that are significant, that create a template for young people that stays with them their whole lives and goes into the very center of their being and their beliefs about their own sense of worthiness or unworthiness. And most people walk around the world with those wounds and never, ever think of it as trauma.
Yeah.
And so in this storyline, we have a similar situation with this boy, and we see the scene where, and it's played out both with the adult character, the 40-year-old, and the boy, where the boy has this successful corrective experience on the playground with some bullies and a wounded dog, and he's sort of the hero, and he's excited and he's proud, and he then adult Bruce Willis realizes that was not the trauma.
Yeah.
The trauma happened when he got home because his mother was dying of a terminal illness, and Bruce realizes that that's the last, that they don't even have another year together before mom passes, and that the dad is so grief-stricken that he just absolutely is not present for young Bruce.
Well, and let's back up to the beginning of the movie. Mm-hmm. One of the first scenes is Bruce Willis, I believe, at his home, which Bruce Willis, the adult in the movie, his character's name is Russ.
Uh-huh.
Bruce Willis, the kid in the movie's name is Rusty.
Rusty, yes. Yeah.
Both of them hate the name that the other goes by.
Uh-huh.
So you do see this really interesting once they get together. They're almost evaluating each other and not liking what is in the other.
Uh-huh.
But it's, of course, the combination of the two that makes, ultimately the true self. But one of the first scenes is Russ at his house, and his father comes over.
Yes. And
is, basically making a bid for connection.
Uh-huh.
I think, maybe his dad's getting ready to move or something like that, and says, hey, I found this at the house, wanted to bring it to you.
Uh-huh.
And, could you come over? Dad, I can pay for a mover. Well, I'd really love for you to come over, Dad. My time is worth money, and it's worth more than what it costs for movers. Mm-hmm. So it's very much like trying to keep his dad at arm's length. And it seems like in that scene, like his dad is, I guess the phrase that comes to my mind is kind of the hat in hand. His dad is kind of standing there with his head down and really making a plea to his son.
Yeah.
And then, this scene much later that you were talking about with Russ and Rusty, where Rusty is picked up from school after this fight that he wins. And, Russ had been thinking, this is really, which it's interesting. It kind of reminds me of in Napoleon Dynamite where Uncle Rico was saying, if I would have made that one toss, my whole life would have been different.
The magic moment that went wrong.
Yes, Russ had kind of, decided my whole life hinges on this one moment. And so I've got to be there and I've got to teach, which I had also forgotten. Most of the movie takes place in Russ's world. But at this point in time, he has come back to the kids' world, which is like 68, something like that.
68 or 69, yeah.
So he's at this moment, my whole life hinges on it. I'm going to teach the kid how to take care of himself. He does. The kid wins the fight. Everything's great. And he has this dawning on him. This isn't it. This isn't it. So the mom comes to the school to pick Rusty up. You never see mom's face. You just hear her voice.
But you see Russ's face when he sees his mother for the first time.
Yeah.
Since he was a boy, it takes his breath away.
Oh, yeah. So when they arrive home, Russ, I believe, follows them and is kind of hanging back, standing and kind of watching. And as mom gets out the car, dad rushes out. And I originally thought maybe mom's pregnant and was on bed rest, something like that. Because dad rushes out and is kind of like holds her, by the back and on the arm and is kind of guiding her in. And I thought, and he's kind of like, what are you doing? Why did you leave? This kind of thing. As soon as she's inside, he turns around and addresses Rusty. And that's where you were talking about.
He yells in his face, and you're killing your mother is what he says to Rusty. And then Rusty's crying, and the dad takes his thumbs, and he rubs them across young Rusty's eyes and says, dry it up. Yeah. Stop crying. And he says it repeatedly and rubs his eyes repeatedly. And we learn that was the origin of Russ's tick in his left eye. And that was the trauma. Because the core belief that you see being formed from that, because we know a year later his mother won't be alive. And that Rusty, in all likelihood, is the boy who believed he killed his mother. And that he has that kind of power. Kids believe that anyway. They believe they're more powerful than they are.
Yeah, very. I don't mean this in a negative way, but self-centered, and it's
egocentric.
It's because of that kind of concrete way of thinking.
Absolutely. Christmas happens to me.
Sure, it's not necessarily the world revolves around me, but it's I only can conceptualize my world.
Correct.
And it's why a lot of times if parents are getting divorced, even if they sit down and have a conversation with their kid saying, this is not your fault.
Right.
The kid believes this is my fault.
Absolutely.
And if I would have been a better kid, or if I'd have done this different, if I'd have washed the dishes or done my homework or taken the dog out, this wouldn't be happening.
I wasn't enough. I wasn't this enough. I wasn't that enough.
Hey, everybody. I want to let you know all of the places that our community, which is still in need of a name, can be found online. First and foremost, there's the podcast, which you are currently listening to. Obviously, you found it on the podcast app that you're listening to it on, but you can also subscribe and listen on Spotify, Pandora, Google Play, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, and Overcast. Next, we've got a Twitter. Check it out at twitter.com, username @therapisttheater, THTR. So THERAPISTTHTR. After that, we've got an Instagram. You can find us in the Instagram app @therapisttheater, all spelled out that time. Finally, you can find us on YouTube by searching Therapist Theater. And if you want to drop us a line via email, just send it to therapisttheater@gmail.com. In fact, why not email in your best suggestion for what our community should call ourselves? Yeah, it was a very, very visceral scene for me. When Rusty had been telling Russ on the way to the school that sometimes Dad lets me help him fix the car. And one time I lost a screw. Or he said, Dad yells at me when I make a mistake. And one time I lost a screw. and he was yelling at me, and it turned out it was in my pocket, but I was too afraid to tell him that I had found it.
Yeah.
And so when his father, is yelling at him, before he rubs his eyes, he grabs him on both sides of his head. Mm-hmm. And it is just this ultimate, I have power over you.
Absolutely.
Kind of positioning. Mm-hmm. And he even, and I don't know if it's like, a conscious thing the actor chose or what, but he even kind of shakes his head a little bit, as a gesture, as like a driving home what he's saying. And he is saying like, you're killing your mother. What in the world? And in the middle of that, Rusty pulls the screw out of his pocket and says, Dad, I found the screw. I found the screw. It's right here. It's right here.
Mm-hmm. Trying to fix whatever he can fix in that moment.
Yeah. Yeah. He's just taking this position of, I'm so sorry for whatever I've done. Please let me try to make it right. Please. It's this bid. And the dad is just, pure reacting out of fear.
Yep.
Out of what is going on inside of his heart and his either inability to address it or his unwillingness. Yeah. Whichever it is. I mean, we get in movies like a tiny, tiny glimpse at, motivations and I mean, actually like in real life.
Right.
We don't get the whole story when we just see something, but
well, it's what's interesting in tying in both the piece about therapy and the film. Right after that scene, young Rusty goes over to older Russ and is asking older Russ to sort of assimilate what just happened. And he says, is Mom dying? And Russ says, yeah. And he said, when? And he said, she won't be around for your next birthday. And he sort of, and Rusty says, did I do it? And Big Russ kneels down and gets eye to eye with him. And very counter to the scene with the other adult man, you see older Russ speaking to his heart and saying, no, you're not capable of doing that. It's cancer. And she's already sick. Yeah. And it's this, I think that's honestly what therapy is. It is tapping into the part of us that has grown and has wisdom and has a less concrete brain and can recognize that adults, whether they're parents or not, are imperfect and have their own stuff going on. And it's speaking from that healthy adult part of ourselves to that wounded kid part and being able to access and tap into. And I think that's how we begin to heal, is we begin to first consider that there's another lens other than the core belief I formed, and that from that lens, I have the ability to change my view, my template, my lens. I honestly believe that recovery is about becoming our own healthy parent. Mm-hmm. And learning how to speak truth to the part of us that carries the shame and carries those wounded places. Mm-hmm. And in therapy, we get to work with people who have knowledge and training and skill, but also whose objectivity we get to borrow when we don't have any for ourselves. Yeah. And we get to do role plays and try on a different way of talking to ourselves and a different way of reasoning the past. Because we have fundamentally different brains today than we did then. Yeah. Yeah. But I love that scene, scene with adult Russ and young Rusty, that healing moment where he just gets to speak truth to his younger self.
Yeah. And I wonder if, and this is getting into speculation territory, I wonder if just watching that memory would have been enough to heal him. Or if the ability to practice basically what is self-compassion was needed, in that kind of healing moment. Like if he would have just seen it, he may have had a little bit of knowledge of what happened. Because, I mean, like you said at the beginning, you know, with him saying, yeah, I purposely blocked out a lot, may or may not be true because of the way trauma works.
Sure.
You know, it may just be the brain going, hey, as an act of preservation,
we're just going to shut this down.
Yeah, we're going to clear the whiteboard and let you move forward without carrying that with you. But it is still there.
Yeah.
And so I wonder if just being able to see it and gain the knowledge of, oh, that's what happened, would have been enough to heal him, or because that is a very, very powerful thing to be able to recognize a need within yourself and to offer yourself something that you needed.
Absolutely. See, I think that's the integral part. I think many of us believe remembering will fix it, or insight will change it. And I think that's probably one of the most popular misbeliefs about healing, is that if I can have understanding for something, then it will change. And my experience personally and professionally is it's not true. I think that insight is a key component to change, but there is the compassion piece, that's the healing part. The remembering makes that compassion easier. I think the fact that adult Russ saw it.
It gives context. Once again, you go back to that, everything makes sense if you have the right context.
Right.
Not everything is healthy or everything is logical, but everything makes sense.
Correct.
Yeah.
I can understand it now. And if I can understand it, then I can do something different with it. Yeah.
And that may or may not be true. I've had clients come in before that have, you know, said, you know, hey, I'm coming in because I've got this addictive behavior happening. I've got this issue that I can't deal with, and I just need to know why. And then sometimes it's in the question below the question, but sometimes it's the explicit question. They kind of want me to help them go back through the table of contents of their life and figure out, like Russ was thinking, what's the one moment where this happened? And I've asked clients before, like, what would happen if you knew that one moment? Is that really what you're after? Like, is it just, if I just know this one fact? Because what if it wasn't one moment? What if it began in a moment, but it was reinforced here, and it was reinforced there, and it was practiced here? You know, I mean, I'm happy to try to talk through things, but I just want to, you know, maybe think about, hey, what if it's not necessarily knowledge is going to bring us healing?
Right.
You know, so much as it is compassion and maybe even understanding, you know, and not necessarily why did this happen, but why has this become something that has held me back?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. What else stood out in the movie for you?
The relationship with the woman whose name I can't remember right now.
I know her real name's Emily Mortimer. Yeah.
Annie. So there's this love interest, or sort of love interest. I'm not, you know, it's interesting because my brain goes, there's two sides to this dynamic. There's his side, but there's also her side. I'm not really sure what's so appealing about him that she's sticking around so closely. So that's probably a conversation for another time.
And also, is she a coworker? Like, what is she?
She's his assistant. I think at one point
I thought that was Lily Tomlin.
He refers to her as an assistant.
He must be a big shot if he's got more than one.
Right. Well, they're at that ball field dealing with the guy who was the slimy diverter of money sort of thing. And he makes some statement about not eating a hot dog because what she does reflects on him. And doesn't she run the camera? Isn't that part of...
Well, she had a handheld camera, but I didn't think that was...
And she filmed the kids.
She's a camera person. I just thought it was in the same way you or I might pull out our cell phone and catch a quick video.
He refers to her as reflecting on him, and she's at the dinners with him when they're talking to the other person in the restaurant.
So they have some professional involvement.
There's a professional involvement. So there is, and she is attracted to him, strangely, despite his unattractive qualities. And there's this dance, there's this flirtation, and it's not as cut and dry as you might want a romance line to be, but it is there nonetheless. And what is evident, just focusing on Russ at this point and knowing what we know about his journey, it is evident that he doesn't have an ability to connect. That, you see his younger self, Rusty proposes to her because Rusty's afraid that Russ is going to blow it. Mm-hmm. He sees that Russ is unwilling to tell Annie that he's attracted to her and wants to be with her. And so Rusty jumps in and does this preemptive strike that Russ yanks him up by the collar about. But you can see that as a boy, when he's still connected to his vulnerability and still allows himself to want things and to say what he wants before he has learned to cover and protect himself more formidably, is able to wear his heart on his sleeve differently and ask for those things, where Russ is completely inept. He doesn't know how to connect with the vulnerability that's required to have a fulfilling relationship. Mm-hmm. And only after the epiphany, and I think he brings a puppy to her door or something, and it's just an interesting...
Oh, that's really late in the game, yeah.
Because at the very end, we see that when 70-year-old Russ is the pilot and shows up at the restaurant, and Rusty and Russ are there to observe it, we see that the old lady looked familiar, and it was Annie. Mm-hmm. And I think that gave 40-year-old Russ permission to take some risks.
Well, and what's interesting about that is, in the dynamic that had existed so far in the movie, Rusty was the kid, Russ was the adult, and they are, give or take 30 years apart. Mm-hmm. He's turning 8, he's turning 40. And then, they're eating in a diner at the end, and then there's a third Russ who's 70-something, mm-hmm. who is 30 years apart from Russ.
Yeah.
And so now all of a sudden Russ is, in effect, the kid to older Russ.
Yeah.
And there had been this running kind of symbolism in the movie throughout about this plane.
Yeah.
And so then when middle Russ mm-hmm. sees older Russ as a pilot, it's like this thing and for the first time in the movie, he, when I say raises his voice, I mean like kind of exclaims.
Gets excited.
Yes, gets excited and dances
like,
and like celebrates.
I'm a pilot. You're a pilot.
And all of a sudden, he is the kid mm-hmm. in that moment.
Yeah.
He is like literally allowed himself to take off everything, every shackle, every chain, every... maybe like governor that he had put on himself to keep his true self at bay to maintain that image.
And that's symbolized because in the middle of his celebration, he turns around and Rusty's gone. He just vanishes. And that's when we see Russ going to Annie's house with the puppy.
And Russ is in his normal clothes.
Yep.
Yeah.
And back to the present day. But it's a little bit Dickensy and sort of Ghosts of Christmas
It's a Wonderful Life
Past, or that It's a Wonderful Life. Yeah. There's sort of this magic component about where he gets to see the potential of his future if he works on his unfinished crap.
Yeah.
This sort of like here's what could be if you are willing to walk through the middle and embrace this little kid who just needs to hear that he's not a loser.
Yeah. Have you seen the movie Rocket Man, the Elton John biopic?
It's funny you say that, because what connected me with this movie, which is why I suggested, is I had a client ask me about that, because we've been doing some parts work, which is where we visit the inner child. We visit the survival self. And so we've been doing some experiential pieces around that. And he asked me if I had seen Rocket Man. And I have not yet, although I'm a huge Elton John fan, so it's on my list.
Please,
but he was describing the part with the boy, with mm-hmm. his younger self. And I suggested the kid to this client right before you contacted me. Mm-hmm. And so that I understand that's a very powerful scene.
It is, and it takes place in the context of recovery.
Yeah.
And it also is reflected in symbolism throughout that movie. And so in a very similar way, it's Elton John reconnecting with his child self.
Correct.
And offering him self-compassion.
Wow.
And for that particular movie, because we taped an episode on it, and that movie was not available to rent until the day that I was taping.
No.
And so I got up and I didn't get up at 4 a.m. I had planned to get up at 6 a.m. to watch it, but I just woke up at 4 and I couldn't get back to sleep. And I was like, all right, let's get started. So I'm watching that movie at like 5 a.m, weeping in the living room because of that scene.
Oh, I can't wait to see it.
And like in a similar way, I started this movie early this morning at like 5:45 or something.
Wow.
And around like 6:30, like Leigh-Ann's getting ready to leave the house, and it was right before that part. So she leaves, I hit, unpause, I hit play again, it gets to that part, and just weeping again of that offering.
Yeah.
I mean, that was a part of my story, that was a part of my work, and in a very real way, because my therapist at the time used some kind of psychodrama family sculpt kind of stuff where another client was playing young me and I walked up and offered the same kind of thing. And so this very, kind of familiar memory of coming up while I'm watching that. And it is a very, very powerful thing.
It really is.
To be able to do that.
My work was experiential as well, and psychodramatic, and the parts work piece helped me find that compassion and forgiveness and grace.
Yeah.
And so I believe in that work, which is, I think, why this movie appeals, and I can't wait to see Rocket Man. I'm very eager. But when the client brought it up, I thought, well, that's what we're doing. That's what this is about. It's about revisiting those old places and recognizing that at the time, that was the A game. That was the only A game, was what we managed to do at that time without the benefit of hindsight. And today we have the benefit of a fully developed frontal cortex and wisdom and experience and hindsight.
Yeah, I know I've said on the show before, I had a friend who conceptualized it this way. He said, something happened with my dad when I was like 8, and I developed a worldview from it. Mm-hmm. And then for the rest of my life, I have operated from this worldview that an 8-year-old conceptualized.
Correct.
And he said, it's almost as if I've, as an adult, I've got an important decision to make, and I walk into Target at the toy section, and I find the nearest kid, and I say, what do you think I should do?
Right.
And then he tells me, and then I just follow his directions.
That's exactly right.
And he said, I'm coming to the realization that like the things that I have in me now are better equipped to handle what I'm facing than the things that I had then, but I'm still following the things that I had then.
Yeah. It's the strongest muscle. And so it's the default position. And so a lot of therapy, I think, is muscle work. It's developing new muscles and in different ways, tapping into wisdom and strengths.
Yeah, and I kind of wondered throughout watching the kid, it's very clear in, I guess, Middle Russ now, in his demonstrations of his relationships and every single interaction he had in the movie, that he either would not or could not connect with somebody else. And so I kind of wondered, because of the age of Rusty when the trauma happened, he was 8. So that's a little more conscious. And even, you see Bruce Willis say, he talks about making these decisions as he moved forward. So I kind of wondered, was it that he truly couldn't connect with people? Was it that he wouldn't? Or was it that when he decided not to, after actively practicing not to for so many years, he lost the ability?
Yeah.
It's
and also lost the awareness of the value. He had and himself alone to navigate in the world. And considering how painful relationships were, riddled with loss, riddled with disappointment, that perhaps his lens developed into this core belief that it's just easier not to.
Yeah, I think he believed that relationships hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't want to have him because I don't want to hurt.
Right.
Because there were so many times in the movie with his dad, with, I forget her name, Deidre, but Jean Smart on the plane, who he met, with Annie, with his assistant, where it was basically, I want to get out of this interaction as quickly as I can. Mm-hmm. And it made me wonder, so that what? So that you can get to what? Because he came home to a giant house that was empty.
Absolutely empty. Almost of furniture, too.
Yeah. It wasn't like he had an activity that he wanted to get. It wasn't like, I just want to get home to build my trains or to like water my plants or whatever it is. But it was literally like, no matter what the interaction is, I just want out of it.
Yeah.
You know? And so that's, I think, an opportunity if he were a client to then really ask, so that you can get to what?
Right. Because it doesn't seem to be towards something. It's from something.
Yeah. And it's emblematic to me of, and I don't know if it's shame inside of him or what, but it's certainly isolating, you know, and it is a self-protecting feature.
Absolutely.
And so it's incredible to see after that healing experience he has with his younger self, to see him begin to, and of course the movie has to wrap up. So what starts as a very small thing all of a sudden is a giant life thing, but begin to embrace relationship again. And starting with kind of embracing that intrapersonal relationship within him.
Absolutely.
Which is what the whole movie's about, basically.
Exactly.
Well, now I love the movie. So
I don't know how anybody wouldn't.
Which is not my favorite thing. One of my favorite things about hosting the show is that that happens all the time. Is I'll watch a movie that a guest picks, and I'll think, meh, or something like that, and then I'll get a chance to talk with the person who picked the movie, and I'm like, well, now I just love that movie.
Did you get to borrow somebody else's lens?
Oh yeah,
yeah,
oh yeah, and it's why I have the guest pick the movies.
Nice. Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. This was fun.
Oh, yeah. Well, let me ask you this. Tell me something that you have learned from your clients. That's not really an ask. That's a command. Can you tell me something that you've learned from your clients?
Oh, sure. Excuse me. Can we pause for just 1 second?
Absolutely.
Okay. I would say that the most significant thing that I continue to learn from clients in general is the relationship of gratitude to joy versus entitlement and expectations to disappointment. And, you know, there are all these click phrases in 12-step recovery, like developing an attitude of gratitude. And they have nifty little pithy quotes all over the walls. And what I observe and what I apply based on what I observe is this recognition that the more I get a handle on my expectations, and there's a saying that expectations are premeditated resentments, and that when I begin to have expectations about other people, I'm setting myself up for disappointment. And when I connect with gratitude, when I connect with openness and flexibility and gratitude, that's where joy lives. And I believe the most joyful people are the people who connect to gratitude, who have a handle on their expectations and subsequently their resentments. And I watch the clients who embrace their own healing journey, their own recovery, and own it, are people who allow their lens to shift from a perspective of deficit and woundedness to resiliency and gratitude, and including the gift of desperation, the gifts that come out of what might not at first glance look like something to be grateful for. My own journey, when I think about your original question of me and why therapy, if I had not had the unraveling I'd had, if I had not had the walk I had and not had the events of my life, I wouldn't get to do this thing. I don't know what I would be doing, but I don't think it would be this. And even if I were to do this, I'm not sure how effective I would be as a person who hadn't had to develop some of my own resiliency. And so shifting from a belief that this shouldn't happen to me, or I shouldn't have to have this experience, or I shouldn't have had to have this pain, to, well, should or shouldn't I did. And as a result of that, I get to have these opportunities to dive deeper, to develop a fondness for myself that might not have come at all if I hadn't had to walk through some flame there to get to it. Several years ago, I had cancer and survived it and got a cure.
Wow.
But I was aware, because of my own journey prior to that experience, of the value of staying connected to openness and gratitude. And I was a guardian on the stories I chose to tell myself. And instead of asking, why me? Why did I get cancer? Really, the question that came to me, and I'm no saint, but the question that came to me from my own life experience is, why not? Why should other people get it and not me? What's so special about me that I should walk through this life with so much ease that nothing ever really scathes or touches me? And just that seemingly simple semantic shift made the road difficult but simple in some ways. And I'm grateful for that. And I'm grateful for the ability to find a version of the story that limits my suffering, doesn't deny me of my pain, but limits the degree to which I must suffer when life gets messy.
Yeah. I mean, humans are the only being on Earth that seeks to make meaning from things. And, Viktor Frankl said that, a person can make it through any what if they have the right why.
Exactly.
And so I'm really kind of just in awe and humbled to hear of that particular struggle and piece of the story, because I just can't imagine what that was like and what it was to go through that. And I'm feeling a lot of hope in hearing that, because I fear that I would have gotten stuck in the self-pity, in the kind of rage against God, kind of fists in the air kind of thing.
I've been there before with other things. So that's where I say I'm no saint here, but I know that experience. I've had it, not about cancer this time, but about other things. And that was an important part. Getting mad at God, getting mad at myself, getting mad at the players that were part of that was the only way through the middle of it to get to the healing part. And so I believe in the value of that. But I also know from experience that's quicksand. It really is very difficult. It takes a hard situation and makes it seem hopeless. And I knew that as a mother with a young child going through cancer, I couldn't afford hopeless. I needed to tap into something that was going to help me have a gentler experience.
Yeah, and and that almost sounds like a step 2 and 3 is just recognizing, that there is a being, a higher power that can restore me to sanity. Yeah, absolutely. And turning your life and will as you understand that higher power over to it.
Absolutely.
And in the midst of that, having that meaning created.
That's exactly what it was for me. I trusted God of my understanding. I didn't feel blaming. Again, we live in a world in which cancer exists. Some of us get it and some of us don't. And I don't believe it's about worthiness. I don't believe it's about value. Sometimes it's lifestyle choices, but quite frankly, plenty of us make horrible lifestyle choices and never get cancer. And so it's not about any of those things. I always say that when I'm talking to people about addiction too. Drug use doesn't cause addiction. Because if that were true, everybody who's ever used it would be an addict.
Mm-hmm.
It's like saying fast food causes diabetes. And everybody who eats fast food would be diabetic if that were true. There's lots of things that go into that. It's a complex why.
It's a bit like every square is a rectangle, but not really every rectangle is a square.
Exactly.
Yeah. I had I heard a therapist say one time, you're not a blank addict, you're a dopamine addict. So it's like the brain chemistry that's happening in that.
Exactly.
You know, you get hooked on the response that your brain has to these things rather than the actual thing, which is a bit potato, tomato, you know.
Well, and I think sometimes the why questions can be quicksand too, especially the whys that don't really have a clean answer. I don't know why I got cancer. I mean, I smoked for a long time. There's that. And I mean, I can find things that are probably indicators or inclinations.
But there's people that have never smoked a cigarette.
And they get it too.
That get lung cancer. And
Exactly.
Yeah. And that's what I think I was thinking earlier when we were talking about, you know, I have clients that want me to walk back through the past and try to find an event. And that's why I always ask them, what if we find it? Right. We can't change it.
No.
It's there, whatever it is. So there's a deeper, and that's why I was saying there's a question behind the question.
And there's a bit of a blame the victim. You know, like if I tell you that I got cancer and I was a smoker, oh, well.
Oh, you did it.
Then you did it.
Yeah.
As if that changes anything.
Yeah.
And the same thing is true with addiction. Oh, well, you used this or you used that. Oh, well, then what? I deserve it? Is that where we're going with this conversation? Because I just don't believe that. I believe that there are certain whys that we will never have a satisfying answer for. And that perhaps it's the question itself that's the problem. And maybe I find a different question. And for me, the cancer question was, why not me? That felt like a gentler question. Who am I that I would get out of this without anything?
Yeah. I had somebody say to me one time, if you ask the wrong question, you'll always get the wrong answer.
No, I like that. I think it's true.
So let's find a better question.
Let's find a better question that has a more livable answer. Yeah.
Let's say that somebody was listening to our conversation today and they just feel like there's a connection, there's a potential for connection, and they want to come see you as a therapist. How could they get a hold of you?
Well, I do have a Psychology Today profile. It's easy to get a hold of me that way if you want to just look up my name. My phone number is 615-308-9385. I would give you a website address, but it is actively in the process of being created.
Is there an email?
I do have an email. It is Karen Moran, LADAC, at hotmail.com. That's K-A-R-E-N-L... No, sorry. K-A-R-E-N-M-O-R-A-N-L-A-D-A-C. That's a mouthful. At hotmail.com.
Cool. Well, thank you so much. This has just been incredible and such a pleasure.
I'm so grateful to be asked. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, thank you. Hi, my love.
Hey.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
Nice. I see that you got your weighted blanket on you again.
Yep. My furry, breathing, weighted blanket.
52-pound weighted blanket who
perfect.
is still recovering from our road trip, as he's a bit like me in that if he's still for more than a minute, he's asleep. Right now. So you got to hear the interview with Karen.
Yep.
What'd you think?
It was great. Yeah, it was.
I'm waiting for the day when you're like, it was garbage.
I don't know if it'll ever come.
I don't think so either.
Yeah, I really don't know. But this one really was great. I don't know. I just felt like everything she said was kind of a gem. And also, I really like when she talked about her why therapy, and then she said that when her clients, when she sees somebody have an aha moment, it reminds them of hers.
It reminds her of hers?
Yeah. Sorry. It reminds her of her aha moments in her own journey. And I don't know if anything has ever described like why doing therapy and working with people is so great in a better way. Like, cause that is like, that's what it is. It's you, like, small pieces of your story are reflected in them, and you also get to see them doing their own journey. And I just think it's really cool.
Yep. Also, you said a gem. I'd like to institute a new rating scale.
Okay.
For interviews where it's either a Jim or it's a James or it's a Jimothy.
This one was definitely a Jim.
Also, which side of that scale is the best?
I don't know. The Jim now for this episode. She also said that her goal is to invite a meaningful experience by the client's definition of meaningful. And that's when you guys talked about, like, who gets to decide what a meaningful life is. And that made me really, like, I had to pause it and think for a couple minutes, because I just thought, like, that's so interesting. And I think it's really hard. I think it's really hard for people to separate what's meaningful to them and what the world tells us is meaningful. Does that make sense?
It makes perfect sense, yeah.
Like, I feel like society values a lot of different things, and if what lights you up is not one of those things, it can be really hard to, I think, be happy and satisfied in your career path and in what you do every day, because the world and society tells you that it's not valuable.
Mm-hmm. And that kind of, like, makes me think of, last week's guest, Nate. Nate has 2 podcasts of his own. Mm-hmm. One called Positive Sobriety that I was a guest on. And the reason why he calls it Positive Sobriety, and I'm saying this because I was working on this with a client today. So anytime a client begins their recovery journey, at the beginning, it's all what's called negative recovery. It's, what is the thing that's hurting you? How do we take things out of your life to where the hurt stops? Then pretty quickly we steer into positive sobriety, and that is, what can we add into your life to make your life better and to make you more you? So, like, how can Leigh-Ann become more Leigh-Ann? How can Josh become more Josh? Mm-hmm. And so, what the client deems meaningful versus what the world deems meaningful, I think, is a lot of positive recovery, because it's the client deciding what gives me meaning and how do I go after more of that.
Mm-hmm. But it can also be really hard to, which that's funny, like, that leads, like, perfectly into what I was going to say next, because everything she talked about just sounded really client driven, which I think is wonderful. Like, I think that's, how things should be. But I think that can also be really scary as a client to, to think of your goals and to realize that you need to have your own kind of vision for what your goal in therapy is. And it just takes thought and time. And I mean, I think the therapist can help you figure out what those goals are. So it doesn't necessarily mean that you come into your first session and then you decide everything and then you have the goals, but ultimately I think that is what I'm saying, goals a lot, but that is what the goal of therapy should be, that it's helping the client become more themselves, more of what they love, more of what's meaningful to them, more of, what their goals are. It's not the therapist's goals. And I just remember hearing her talk about that and hearing you guys talk about that. I agree. I just also think it can be scary as a client to realize 100%.
100%. And I think that, at least on my part, I always go back to thinking, what was I thinking and feeling the first time I sat on my therapist's couch? Mm-hmm. And I remember being scared to death, partially because of, like, what I was going in for. But the other, reason for that being, I didn't know how therapy worked.
Yeah.
So I remember thinking, what happens first? Do I talk? Does he talk? Like, is it just him talking? Is it just me talking? Do I have to do the Sigmund Freud psychoanalysis, I lay down on the couch thing?
Yeah.
Like, do I have to take my shoes off if I lay down on the couch? Like, I just remember thinking that kind of stuff. And I think, anytime a person's coming in and they're on fire from whatever it is that's bringing them in, to have that plus the unfamiliarity of how therapy works. Like, I hope, I was going to say I think, but I don't know for sure. I hope that any good therapist would start from a position of, how do I join alongside this person and make them feel comfortable and safe in what is already such a scary and unfamiliar endeavor.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it on the client's part, you and I were just talking about this the other day, like just needing to trust the therapist. Like there's certainly a level of, do you get along with them? Do you feel like they can understand you? Do you feel like they can meet you where you are? But there is also a level of like, it's going to be uncomfortable and it's okay to not know what's going to happen next. What your job is to just show up and bring like your heart and your mind into the room.
Yeah. And I never want to ask a client to trust me. I always look at it as, how can I earn their trust? And so for me, to ask a client to trust me is not emblematic of a healthy or realistic relationship. And so even though the therapeutic relationship, therapist to client, is different than like a friendship or something, it still has the same basic bones. So, you know, we were taught, and I think this still, the best tool of the therapist is the therapeutic relationship, which helps me out a ton, because since I feel really safe when I know a lot, those moments when I don't know what to do in session, I'm reminded, all I have to do is be in relationship. And so if that is kind of my number one tool, and if that is the number one method of, I guess, like delivery of good therapy, then for me, you know, what's the primary task of relationship? Well, it's establishing trust so that you can have healthy intimacy. And so I always look at it like that. Like, I don't ever want to ask a client to trust me. I'd rather show them they can trust me.
She also talked about ACEs, woot woot, which I think I've talked about before. It's adverse childhood experiences. When I say I think, I mean, I'm like 99.9% sure, because it's like all we talk about at work. And yeah, it was a really important research study that was done a long time ago. I think everybody should Google it and learn about it. Basically, like, you know, there's these categories and types of adverse childhood experiences, and the more that you have, the more likely you are to have some not so positive outcomes later in life. And it affects your health and all of that. But a study just came out when she talked about this. This is what I kind of thought that I would say. A study just came out about the opposite of that, positive childhood experiences, and how those are factors and experiences that build resilience to adverse childhood experiences. So Google both of those studies, because they're really cool. And I think it sounds really common sense, but when you read it, it really makes you think about your own childhood, how it affects you in adulthood. And then also, if you have any kids in your life, I think it's really worth just thinking through and recognizing, you know, stuff that happens to kids isn't just, you know, a bad day or a bad thing that happened. Like, it can impact them long term. So, you know, she talked about ACEs. I had to talk about it. Also, when you guys were talking about the movie, and you were talking about that part where little Rusty is basically getting berated by Big Russ, whose name is Russ. Yeah. And when you guys were talking about it and during that part, I just thought, don't we all do that? Like, don't we all sort of talk to ourselves and our childhood selves that way at some point? Like, that is such a good depiction of like negative self-talk, and like the way that we can look back on maybe the things that we did in childhood or even things that we did in adulthood, like even things that are happening now. And what we're really doing is like yelling at our childhood self, which I think is really sad.
Well, do you remember what Jeremy said? Jeremy said he would drive down the road and have a conversation with his younger self, and then he noticed that his younger self had grown. Uh-huh. Yeah, it reminded me of that.
Yeah. I mean, part...
it's the literal, like, depiction of that, I guess.
Yeah, it is. And, like, and I think there's a lot of us, if you're not conscious about it and you're not, if you're not practicing self-compassion, like, that's what so many of us do without realizing it. We damage ourselves, and, like, it's tough to feel good about yourself if, like, for Rusty is the small one. I keep getting confused. For Rusty, like, how could he feel good about himself or, like, have, I don't know, a positive outlook when the older version of himself was, like, yelling at him?
Oh, they never gave a name to the oldest version. In my head, he's Russell.
Yeah, that sounds sophisticated.
Rusty, Russ, and Russell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's right. So I think the last thing was just, it was towards the end, you guys, Karen was talking about when she was diagnosed with cancer and how the question that she asked was, why not me? And you guys started talking about, like, you said that somebody used to tell you, if you are asking the wrong question, you're always going to get the wrong answer. And I just love that. It really that's another time that I paused it and I tried to think, like, what are some wrong questions that I'm asking myself? Like, where are some areas that I can reframe kind of how I'm thinking about it? And it really does, even in her talking about, like, gratitude and expectation. She had the comment that, hold on, I'm going to get it wrong. Karen, I'm sorry if I get this wrong. Expectations are premeditated resentment, or is premeditated resentment, or something like that. I love that. I think that's big. That's impactful. I also think it's really hard to not have expectations. Well, impossible. I don't think it's that you shouldn't have expectations.
She was saying that you shouldn't have them.
Yeah. I don't think she was saying you shouldn't have. I don't think that you shouldn't have expectations, but I think when you're practicing gratefulness, it's like you're keeping your expectations in check, maybe.
Yeah. I think fessing up to what your expectations are is the most important thing.
Yeah.
Because I think it's like the first step. It's the building block of, it's the first way to reflect on them. Mm-hmm. It's just fessing up to what they are.
Yeah.
It's taking responsibility for what's inside of you.
That's it.
Awesome. So The Kid, buy, rent, or pass?
Buy, for sure.
Nice. What would I say? I could say buy. It really came together for me in the end.
I'm really surprised that this was one of those movies for you. I didn't think that it... Well, no, I don't think it came together for you in the end of the movie. There are some movies that you end the movie and you're kind of like, meh, and then you have the interview and you love it. This one, I think, when you ended the movie, you were already on board.
Yes.
But it took till the end of the movie.
Yeah, because of the last, 20 minutes, yeah. I'm a sucker for anything where there's, like, a powerful thing with a dad.
Yeah.
Like, anything...
About time, anyone?
Yeah. By the way, if you haven't listened to the episode that we did on the movie About Time, please go back, listen to it. Well, first go to Netflix and watch the movie About Time. Just trust me. Then go back and listen to the episode, and then know that this weekend we forced Leigh-Ann's parents to watch it with us, and
it had the desired effect.
There was a flood in the house from 4 grown adults and a dog crying.
It's true.
And it was the intended effect, I guess.
It was perfect.
Yeah. Well, I think that's an episode.
Wow.
Yeah. I like it.
Me too.
Cool. So, thanks so much for listening. If you've made it this far, please go into the podcast app, whichever one you're listening on. Give us a 5-star rating. Write a review. And if you haven't yet, subscribe. We appreciate it absolutely so much. We just thank you so much for listening.
Yeah.
And we're going to go ahead and say that you can raise the lights, lower the curtain, and for this week say that the theater is closed.